Okay. Race-based. Loving versus Virginia, to cite that with gay marriage is demonstrably false. As we know, I cannot wash off being black. I cannot change being black tomorrow. But we do know about some homosexuals who have changed and become straight. That tells you that that is a behavioral pattern as opposed to something that you are born with. That's number one. So to cite Loving versus Virginia that made interracial marriage legal is a false analogy. It makes no sense. And because it doesn't deal with the fundamental definition of marriage which I offered, which has to do with being one of the most fundamental institutions. What does interracial marriage have to do with that? Nothing at all. But when you're trying to say that gay marriage should be legal, you are trying to redefine marriage in a way that you cannot say that Loving versus Virginia did. That's point number one. Point number two, telling me we live in a free society is a platitude. It is not an argument. You need to offer an actual argument as to why gay marriage should be added to marriage. And telling me that you need to have freedom to love who you want to love. I might love my dog, but that doesn't mean I should get married to my dog. You need to have an argument.
If you like our argument, I think you can sum up in one word: equality. I think that we can argue clearly that equality under law is paramount in a functioning democracy. The 14th Amendment, which was used in the Loving versus Virginia case, was used to apply to say that different racial groups, as a protected group, have the right to the same equal protections as every other citizen. Now, why would we deny a certain group of citizens what we give every other citizen? That is in itself an inequality under law. And the 14th Amendment clearly states that, well, it's interpreted to state that all citizens should have equal protection under law. And isn't it the case by prohibiting a certain group based on their sexual orientation the right to marriage? Isn't that not inequality under the law?
Can I respond? Equality, the word equality is not an argument. Again, that is a platitude. Just telling me equality, what does that mean? That's not an argument. Gays are not being denied anything. They are not being denied anything. Gays can get married to a heterosexual, they can get engaged in a heterosexual marriage like everybody else. If gay people were being denied from getting married to somebody of the opposite sex, then you could say that they're being denied something. They are not being denied anything. In the same way, you can't cite the 14th Amendment and equal protection. That doesn't qualify. Again, you're taking race and sexual orientation and acting as if they're the same thing when they demonstrably are not. Like I said, I cannot wash off being black, but a gay can change to be straight. That has happened before. You can read all of the, you can gasp or whatever, but you can read on the internet of stories of people who have changed. So that is not an equal protection violation. If you can produce some kind of scientific research to show that the gay gene is something that actually exists, then your argument can go forward. And then you can win something like overturn DOMA in the Supreme Court. But until then, you can't do that. Equality is not an argument. Freedom to choose who you want to love is not a rationale for marriage. As I said in my opening speech, how do you then stop incestuous relationships? How do you then stop polygamy? You have no argument.
I'll step in and answer just two questions. The question for the Republicans. I think one of the arguments you're making is operating under the assumption that definitions have essential meanings. Right? In the modern era, at least philosophically, we've moved to a kind of Wittgensteinian approach to language, and their meanings get their words get their meaning from use. And so if people start using marriage to incorporate homosexuals, then that's what their meaning is. Another way of thinking about definitions and words and their meanings is the meaning of marriage is essentially a contested concept, and so there is no essence there. It's essentially contested. And so then to foist logic and to sort of to push towards logic, inductive logic, is actually a false way of arguing. That's the rhetoric there. So just how do you sort of incorporate this understanding of essential meanings of marriage instead of words getting meanings from reduced, which is sort of the game in town these days, at least in the philosophical world, and also this notion of essentially contested concepts where marriage is an essentially contested site that the democratic process decides. That's one question for you. And a question for you, for Democrats, here, on the one hand, you're making a rights-based liberty argument to defend choice, which is an argument based on rights. On the other hand, you're making an argument based on equality, equal protection, group rights, anti-discrimination. And this has sort of been dividing the approaches towards advancing gay marriage. Like, where do the Democrats stand on this question? Is this an issue of choice, individual choice, a question of human dignity, that you have the dignity to, each individual has the dignity to choose who their partner is, or whether that's a biological choice or not, but at least to select partners a particular person, or is this an equal protections, group rights question? Add some thoughts on that.
Well, I reject the premise of your assertion that we use language based on use as opposed to real definitions. If what you say is accurate, then how would we have the law? I could say murder is love and it's get off scot-free. I don't agree with the postmodernist theory of words not having any kind of definition, and that I believe if you want to change things, you need to make arguments for it. And all the arguments that I've offered have not been refuted by the Democrats, and the Democrats haven't offered any arguments except to tell me equality and love who you want to love. That's not an argument for changing an institution. Marriage has not been contested for millennia. For millennia, marriage has always been an institution between one man and one woman. It's only until 1993 with the Hawaii Supreme Court that we actually got gay marriage into the federal realm, which is why DOMA had to be introduced. And that was to protect the state's rights in order to be able to define marriage under the full faith and credit clause of the US Constitution. So I really don't agree with this idea that you can just define words through usage. No, there needs to be a fundamental definition for words that people use so we can actually communicate. We can't change things as we go along. Otherwise, I can say blue is black, and no one will know what I'm talking about. I can say, well, I want to change the meaning of blue to black. That's not how we operate. We need to have fixed definitions for words. That's how we enforce the law, and that's how we communicate between people.
In response to your follow-up question?
If this was a comedy show, I'd be laughing right now, because this entire debate has been completely ridiculous. To somehow claim that we have provided no sorts of arguments here and just ignore everything we say is just an outright, I have no idea how to comprehend this. Equality. That's an important message we stand for. And as Republicans, you are somehow claiming that the LGBTQ community is, I don't know, 3/5 of a community, subhuman, and I'm offended by your rhetoric here. What we want is equal marriage for all people. What we want here is so all people can be happy. And if you're going to say, no, you can't be happy, fine, but don't have any part in our law. You provide no information why gay marriage is somehow bad. You say, oh, they're polygamous or something. So what? Why can't they be allowed to be happy?
If I may, one more quick point. We've been talking a lot about the definitions of words. You were saying that definitions need to be quickly defined, but here are a few words that were defined colloquially by people like us. Xerox, Google Tissue, all of these used to be brand names. These used to be tangible ideas, objects, companies that we thought. But today, when I talk about Googling something, I could be searching on any website looking at the internet. With Xerox, I could be sending anything. And this has just been in our lifetimes. So clearly, if these words can change in a short 20 years, I'm sure the term marriage can change in 2,000 years.
That's a false argument and a false analogy. I think everybody in this room is smart enough to understand that Xerox and marriage are two different things. And Xerox has not been existing for millennia. It's something that has been existing quite recently. So you can't equate marriage and Xerox. And the argument that I said gays are polygamous and 3/5 of a human, where did you get that from? Because that's a straw man argument and thus invalid. Please learn logic.